Alfredo, tell us about your story and like how you ended up where you are.
Okay, so I think that's a really interesting starting point. So when I was young, I suffered a lot of abuse in all capacities. Trigger warning for those listening.
Ooh, that's a good point.
I want to
just
put that out there.
appreciate
It's
that.
a trigger warning. But I have suffered my fair share of bad hands.
Mm-hmm.
Some my fault. I will take ownership of those, and some not so much my fault. So when I was young, I used it as a way to cut down people who were for God, for Jesus, because my argument was always, if he is so benevolent, why allow me to suffer the way he did? And why allow a lot of people to suffer the way that they do? So I learned a lot about every religion, Buddha, the Torah, the Quran, the Bible. But I didn't use it in the sense of wanting faith. I used it as a way of cutting down whoever was my opponent at the time. So I learned a lot. I had a lot of what is known as synthetic knowledge, not firsthand knowledge. So everything that I read came with like a grain of salt almost, because I had never experienced the power of God. So everything that I read, I was like, well, God has never done this in my life. He's never done that in my life. So I would use the Bible and other things to make people contradict themselves. And I was really good at letting people hang themselves with their own words. And so I always walked around with a snarky attitude of superiority. Like, I am better because I don't believe what you believe. I know I did it by myself. That was not the case. We'll fast forward a few years. There was a lot of drug usage in my past, a lot of alcohol abuse in my past. And it came to a head in 2018. I was on a really bad bender. I had spiraled completely out of control. Lost my wife at the time. Lost my kids. She wanted to protect them, so she kept them from me, which, by the way, very justified, because I was a horrible, horrible father at the time, because my selfishness overtook the need to be a parent. And I also attribute that to a lack of God, because if I had known the love of a father, I would have been able to transform that to my children.
That's powerful.
But I didn't know that, because my whole attitude was always, I'm going to cut you down so I can get mine. But anyway, so 2018 rolled around towards the end. I had taken a gun from a friend, and I was tired. I couldn't live with or without the alcohol, the drugs, and I couldn't live with or without faith, because everything that I had done to that point was to satisfy self. It was, and something I've learned along my journey is, if the outcome is always going to be about me, I will hit a wall where I cannot surmount it, because it's about me. It's not about the big picture. And we'll get into that later too.
Love it. Foreshadowing.
A little bit. Or is it a red herring? We'll never know. But yeah, so I took this gun. I went to Lake Monroe at about 1 a.m. And I put the gun to my head, and I pulled the trigger. And it was a Glock. Guns notorious for not jamming, for always being good in that level. And it jammed. The gun didn't go off. And I remember being so upset, so frustrated.
That's so crazy.
Because I was like, I can't even do this right. Because again, it was always about self. So it wasn't God is saving my life. It was, I can't do this right. I have the power and I can't. So maybe I don't have the power. And that's really where it began for me. Was, you know, I realized I don't have the power, so I turned to YouTube, which is my musical savior always. I connect a lot to music. I come from a musical family, you know, and I listened to a lot of music growing up. So for me, when I turned to YouTube, it was, all right, show me something that's going to tell me how to make this feel better. Because obviously I can't go on drinking and consuming drugs the way I was. When I opened up YouTube, it was a video, the first thing on my recommended page, by a pastor, Clayton Jennings. I will use his name because the video did save my life. And the video, if you're interested in looking for it, was "Please Don't Kill Yourself." It was a spoken word poem. I had never heard of Clayton Jennings. I had never looked into any poetry at this time. It was always about music. So the fact that it was a spoken word poem and it was by a pastor and it was entitled "Please Don't Kill Yourself."
That's so on the nose.
I was like,
I've never heard of it.
I was like, all right, God, maybe you are real. Maybe this is the beginning of the transformation because obviously you have a message to get to me. And you know, when I heard it, I was in tears. I was in tears completely. And that was the beginning of the transformation for me. It wasn't the beginning of me getting sober or anything like that. But it was the beginning of a change of heart.